Your Excellency, thanks for this opportunity to have this first interview with the Free Media Group on Radio Plus.
Great, thank you. Well, Jean-Luc, thank you as well. Thank you for the opportunity to meet with you and have a chance to speak with others in sort of the community here in Mauritius. I think, as you know, I've only just recently arrived. Actually, presented my credentials just a week from Tuesday, so just a week and a half have I been able to really get out and meet and talk to people. And I've met with a number of leading government officials, but I do think it's really important for me to also have a chance to talk to the broader community here in Mauritius, because I do want to have myself and the embassy really engaging with as many communities and people as we can.
Yeah. You have experience in East Asia and Pacific affairs in the
Yes.
Bureau. You've been working in Thailand also.
Yes.
You've been in Dhaka, Bangladesh.
Yes.
It's your first time in Africa.
Well, yes and no, in a sense that I have spent quite a bit of time in Asia, as you mentioned, 5 years essentially in South Asia, in Dhaka and Calcutta, 7 years in Thailand, in Chiang Mai and Bangkok. And I also, when I was in Washington, I was director for the Office for East Asian Pacific Security Regional Policy. So talking about regional issues, both in security, environment, disaster assistance, a whole range of different issues related to the regional engagement. But again, I think some of those issues in that context are very similar here. I mean, we do talk about the Indo-Pacific region, and I think Mauritius is an interesting country in the sense that it sort of straddles regions. It's very, very much part of Africa and a very committed member to the African Union, but it also has a very, I think, important role in the context of the Indo-Pacific region as well. So I feel like I have some familiarity with sort of the dynamic, the challenges, issues, as well as some of the cultural aspects, given the number of individuals who come, families are descended from Asia. But I also have had exposure to Africa as well in my time as director for the Bureau of Overseas, acting director, as the Bureau of Overseas Buildings Operations. That bureau, that office was responsible for all our facilities globally. And we have a presence at about 190, posts globally. And we were doing and have been doing a number of significant projects in Africa, and had a chance during that process to get out and to see some of the activities that we're doing, engage with some of the host government officials, and get some familiarity with the dynamics on the ground there. I was very excited too that I was involved in the early design process for the new embassy compound that we are hoping to break ground on in coming months. So I had a very early understanding of some of the challenges when it comes to looking at how we develop a new facility here, the issues. Certainly the environmental piece is a big factor, I think. So while this is my first time, I feel like I've been preparing myself for this position and for being here today.
Okay, you just present your credential letter to the President of the Republic.
That's
you met
right.
the Prime Minister also. I suppose the discussions were on the bilateral relationship between Mauritius and the
Yes.
US. What it is all about?
Well, first, I was very excited and fortunate, I felt, to be able to arrive, and then within a few days, even with the cyclone, to have a chance to meet with the President. And the President was very generous with his time. He gave me about an hour and a half of time to speak with him. And again, being able to do the credentials very early allowed me then to get out and to meet with others and to meet with the Prime Minister very early. And they were, very open about how important they felt the relationship with the United States was. And I think the fact that they made a conscious effort to meet with me early, allowed me to engage with everybody as quickly as possible, and to give me so much of their time was really a reflection on how important they felt the relationship with the United States was. And in our discussions, we hit on a couple of broad themes, really talking about our shared history. The President actually commented to surprise how long that there's been some kind of U.S. diplomatic representation here in Mauritius. He went and mentioned that there had been a consul here dating back to 1794. So that for the United States early, even soon after its independence, it found or felt that there was an importance here to Mauritius to having a presence of some kind. And it really is a reflection on Mauritius's strategic location. It's at a crossroads of the Indian Ocean, Africa, and it's important for its location, it's important for trade, it's important now as we talk about issues like climate change and the environment. And so there are these reasons for the long and close enduring relationship. So we talked about that, the history of the relationship. We talked about shared perspectives and views on democracy, the importance of democracy, sustaining democratic institutions. We've had challenges in the U.S. Any democracy will have challenge with institutions, and seeing how we can collaborate and support each other as you work through some of the dynamics related to supporting democracy inherently. And then the other issue we talked a bit about was trade. Strong interest in seeing how the United States could continue to engage with Mauritius in trade. And we also looked at opportunities on, as I mentioned, sort of on the environment and then security, fundamentally also on security, because it's important, I think, for all of us to see how we can collaborate and cooperate to create a stable, secure globe.
Yeah, the issue of security is a major issue here in Mauritius right now because of the drug traffic in the region, Indian Ocean. Have you been able to talk about this issue, the maritime security?
We talked about maritime security, and we also talked about some of the transnational crimes. And Mina did reference the fact that our DEA office, Drug Enforcement Agency, has had 3 programs here since 2019, and we in fact have a sort of anti-narcotics program that we're doing regionally with Seychelles, Comoros, Madagascar, and Mauritius. About $753,000 are committed to this project, and so we have this engagement in the area of transnational crime, counter-narcotics specifically. But again, we're also interested in other aspects. So when you talk about security, we like to think of it as, very broad, holistic. There's a law enforcement component. There's sort of your traditional, when you think about sort of defense aspects of it. But there's also just a range of various social aspects, security when it comes to such as unauthorized fisheries. So there's a lot of nuances to, and we want to engage on sort of the whole spectrum of maritime security and domain awareness. And again, we're very excited. We're having an exercise coming up, a regional exercise, Cutlass Express, coming up in March, kicking off in just a couple of weeks. And that exercise here in Mauritius and Seychelles will be an opportunity to work with the local defense forces and Coast Guard and help enhancing their
objectives on that?
The objective is to, again, build skills and develop collaboration, cooperation, and to provide that additional maritime awareness and security.
Okay. One of the key priorities right now for Mauritius is the Chagos archipelago issue. I suppose you've got discussions about that with the official.
Well, obviously it's, as I get up to speed on all issues Mauritius, I am very aware that the Chagos is something that is, top focus for Mauritius and the local government here.
Discussions are going on with the Mauritius counterpart and the US and the UK.
Well, I would clarify that and say, discussions are ongoing between the UK and Mauritius, and I think we've been very clear that, very much, support that dialogue. We have supported the UK sovereignty over the Chagos, but understand that, now is an opportunity for the UK and Mauritius to have a very constructive dialogue and try to come to an agreement.
The recent report that the Human Rights Watch stated that it's a crime against humanity. We have not seen any comments about this report from the Human Rights Watch since.
Well, I think what we've said in the past is very much we support the work that Human Rights Watch does globally. It's an important organization and it does an important or good work, and I think highlighting global human rights concerns and issues, and so appreciate the efforts that they're taking. I think we've expressed our regret for what had happened previously, and understand that the UK has been trying to take steps to address that, and has looked at how they can support the Chagos Islanders, whether through efforts to try to give them citizenship in the UK, support, educational support, and so on. So I think they've been trying to find ways to address those concerns. But again, I think the key thing to focus on really is the fact that the two countries now are in a dialogue, and we hope that they can come to a resolution. And our feeling is that both parties have come with good faith and want to get a solution here, come in, to negotiate in good faith.
It's only a bilateral issue with the UK and Mauritius, or the US is part of these discussions also?
Again, it's that discussion is between the UK and Mauritius. So yes, it is a bilateral discussion. UK and Mauritius are having a conversation about this. And again, I think we think they're doing
and
it good.
You're sitting back and watching what is happening.
Well, I wouldn't say we're sitting back. But we think that that is the appropriate way for the discussions to go forward for the resolution of the sovereignty issue.
Because you have a main role, in fact, in this situation because of the Diego Garcia military base.
No, I mean, Diego Garcia is, I think, very important, not just for the U.S., but for the region, for other countries, because it has a critical role for providing regional security, has a range of different functions as a platform. And you've seen in the past where so humanitarian assistance and aid for various instances, earthquakes in Syria and elsewhere, where there's been some of these humanitarian disasters, and we've been successful in using Diego Garcia as a platform to support those. So it has a very important role. It is key, and I think the Prime Minister himself has said that, he recognizes the value and importance of Diego Garcia. But I think, the key thing is if you're talking about the question of Chagos Islands and the sovereignty of Chagos Islands, that dialogue really belongs between the UK and Mauritius.
Such a military base in this region, it has the same importance as it used to have?
Well, I think yes. I mean, I think, again, maybe speaking as the American ambassador, of course, I'm going to say this, but I think it's a valid thing to say, is that the United States, I think, has been an agent for good globally, that we have helped to provide security and support for many countries, including Mauritius. Diego Garcia is a platform that more effectively allows us to do that, and having that presence there means that the U.S. is committed to the security of the Indo-Pacific region. I think, again, in my conversations with Mauritian officials, the key thing that they highlight to me is the sense that the United States is a key partner for Mauritius' security, security, economy, and just support for its institutions. So I think the officials here recognize the value in having a U.S. presence and engagement. And so to answer your question, I would say yes, there is an importance there.
The U.S. talk about the human rights issue every time. We have been talking about that with what is happening in Ukraine also. But what about the Chagosian community? They're talking right now this resettlement. Does this cohabitation possible?
Well, I guess I'd ask, my question would go back to you, is you're drawing a parallel between Ukraine and Chagos Islands. Could you clarify what you mean by that?
the human rights issue.
Okay, what is the symbol?
It's always an issue.
I'm not trying to, sorry, just for my own clarification,
okay.
Sorry.
I mean, when we talk about human rights issue,
sure.
This has been raised also with the Ukraine situation, in poverty, in such conditions, dramatic situations. And those people in Mauritius, they're living in poverty, dramatic situation in Mauritius and in Seychelles also.
Well, I guess I would question, that's why I asked, the question to you initially, whether you can really draw parallels with Ukraine and the Chagos Islanders. I think, we can all see how aggressive and brutal the Russian invasion of Ukraine was, causing the deaths of tens of thousands of people, dislocation of millions, targeting of civilians, targeting of women and children, efforts to seize the entire country, thankfully were unsuccessful, overthrow a government. I'm not quite sure how that relates, in this case, to the Chagos Islanders. Again, we've expressed our regret for what happened with the dislocation of the islanders. We've noted that I think that the UK has been trying to address that, and that there is a peaceful dialogue that's ongoing between the UK and Mauritius. To be honest, I'm not quite seeing the parallels with what's going on in Ukraine, because the Russians have not committed to a peaceful dialogue.
This situation triggered abuses, discrimination, poverty. Those people are living in quite the same situation right now.
Yes.
And the natives, the community itself, the natives community, is no longer what it was before.
No,
their situation has not seen any solution.
I would go back, Jean-Luc, if I could. I'd go back and I would just really question the premise that one could draw parallels between how aggressive and brutal the invasion of Russia was to, what you outline is, the condition of the Chagosians, again, regrettable, and something I think the UK is trying to address, and trying to make that on the same, sort of the same kind of situation that we have in Ukraine. I think it's a bit of a false parallel there, a false comparison. And I think it does, in a way, diminish the brutality of what's actually happened in Ukraine. And I think it, in a way, doesn't do justice to just the outrageous actions of the Russians in invading Ukraine, unprovoked, part of an ongoing campaign against this country dating back to 2014 when they first seized Crimea, seized Luhansk and Donetsk. And so you're seeing this continued aggressive, brutal action. And I think what's also, important to highlight is that it's not just me saying it, but it's really a global sort of disgust with what's going on there. If you look at the consistent voting in the UN condemning the Russians' actions, in fact, Mauritius and Seychelles have both supported these resolutions in the United Nations. So I think there's a recognition here and in the Seychelles that what the Russians are doing is just unacceptable and completely outrageous. And 50 countries, in fact, are presently supporting the Ukrainian government with financial support, weapons, humanitarian assistance. So there's a global mobilization to address what's going on in Ukraine. And it's a violent activity by the Russians where you have an effort by the UK and Mauritius to come to a peaceful resolution in the context of the Chagos Islands. I just don't see that parallel at all. Thank you. Sorry.
Let's talk about the financial support. I'll come back to the Human Rights Watch report. They're saying that the US should give a financial compensation to the Chagosian community. What is your opinion about that?
Well, again, I mean, certainly respect the work of the Human Rights Watch and what it's trying to do to highlight these issues. I do know the UK has already been looking at the kinds of compensation and support they can provide. I mean, I think we should see how that process of dialogue goes forward.
My question on Ukraine overlaps what I wanted to say about is a cohabitation possible with the military base in Nicosia and the resettlement process of the Chagosian people?
Well, again, I think it's a bit early to speculate. I don't want to go down hypotheticals because I just don't know what arrangements that the UK will ultimately, what the agreement with the UK and Mauritius ultimately look like. So let's see what happens before we make those kinds of conjectures.
As a former captain in the US Army, do you think people can live in the islands next to the military?
Well, again, that I think is conjecture, and these are sort of complex discussions. Not sure what will be the final approach, what will be the considerations, and how it'll look. So, better let's just see what happens.
This region, the Indian Ocean, right now is in the heart of a great, power rivalry between India and China. Yeah. The Indian Ocean region, it's you as a former U.S. Army, I suppose you judge how important this region is right now.
Well, again, yes. I think there's a recognition that the Indo-Pacific region is strategically important, but I think not sort of for one country or another, but for sort of the global commons. And I think it is, sort of reflects the fact that, Mauritius is in a key place. And I think, again, reflects the importance of Mauritius and why many countries are seeking to engage with Mauritius. I think Mauritius is trying to figure out how to balance those interests, and I think is trying to work constructively with different countries. At the end of the day, though, I would have to say, I think the United States, and I sort of have to say because I am the U.S. ambassador, but I think it's also, again, as I would say, fundamentally true. The United States really is an indispensable partner at the end of the day. Again, we bring a lot of expertise, a lot of skill, a lot of resources, but we bring a lot of shared values and experiences and expectations. And again, I'm meeting with government officials, as I mentioned earlier, but I've also tried to do a bit more outreach, and I hope to do a lot more as I get settled and engage with a broader cross-section of the community. Because I think that engagement with civil society is critical, because at the end of the day, that's sort of what I think the United States really stands for, is trying to be as inclusive, engaged, and accountable to its people. And it's that kind of experience, those kinds of approaches that I think is important for us to share. I think that's what we uniquely bring to the dialogue and to the relationship with Mauritius. For us, it's not just about sort of the security cooperation, it's about the whole spectrum of cooperation to try to see how we can help and promote good governance, the rule of law, democratic institutions, because again, I think the feeling is that democracies are able to engage more peacefully, more fundamentally with each other than non-democracies. And I think most Mauritians realize that. If you look at the end of the day, for instance, when Mauritians youth think about where would I want to go, where would I want to live, where would I want to study, and ultimately, where would I want to have those connections, I think they see the attraction to the U.S., to Europe, those countries where there really is an expression of hope, inclusion, and opportunity. I don't think you see that per se, maybe in the context of China.
Well, the presence of India on the Agalega issue, I suppose I've been briefed about the Agalega issue. It's not been clear enough since now. Do you understand that there will be a military facility on the island? Is it a concern for the U.S. embassy?
Well, I've certainly read reports. I don't want to go into the details of something like that because I don't, I think those questions regarding Agalega and what's happening there are probably better for, the High Commission rather than the U.S. Embassy. So I think that they would be better positioned to speak to some of these questions that you might have.
But the situation in this region, I suppose, is a great concern for the U.S. officials and the U.S. government, and having a military base supposedly in the region is a concern, no?
Well, again, I don't want to conjecture, and I'm not in a position to say what's really happening in Agalega. I think those questions are better directed to either the Mauritian government or to the Indian government to speak to what is actually happening in Agalega.
Okay. Recently, a scandal broke up here in Mauritius about some allegations that the Mauritian Prime Minister, Pravin Jugnauth, allowed Indian tech team to install equipment for intercepting internet traffic, and it was said that there have been interception of data in the region of Floreal where all the embassies are.
That's where I live.
US,
I had seen
an inquiry about that.
I'd seen, again, some of the same reports that you had as well. I guess what I would say to that, I can't speak to the merits of what happened. I think there's been a lot of conjecture on that. But I think the fundamental thing for us from the U.S. perspective is very much committed to cybersecurity. I think fundamentally, the internet, cyber connections, they really are the highways of the future. They're what connect us all. And we are very committed to ensuring that the free movement of that information, the security, and I think it's important to continue to focus on that more broadly and make sure that all countries are adhering to those issues of preserving internet freedoms and security.
Well, what is it all about? There has been data capture, you have an inquiry going on, you have some...
Well, again, I think the question of what is happening or not happening is probably better directed if it is involving the Indians, as it appears, based on reporting, to engage with my Indian counterparts and see what they can offer.
But at this time, we knew that the embassies were shocked to learn that data capture was going on, and there's nothing about this.
Which embassy was shocked?
Several embassies.
Oh, several embassies. Yeah. Oh, okay. And there was, I'm sorry, finish your question, I'm sorry.
They were talking about how come you can have data capture if communications can be intercepted, and does the U.S. Embassy has any information about that? Has your conversation, data has been captured?
Well, I think, again, the question of what has happened or hasn't happened, it'd be better directed at those that are parties to this story. Again, I don't know if I'm in the position to best characterize what happened or didn't happen. Again, I'm hesitant to represent the interests of the Indian, the Indian High Commission.
Very diplomatic answer. My next question is about the First Amendment. The freedom of speech is something very important in the U.S. We have some issues here in Mauritius about the media being targeted, some journalists being sued. Regularly, this happen. What is your opinion? Have you been able to see what is happening around before coming to Mauritius? And
well, I mean, Jean-Luc, thank you for asking. I have, in the process of my preparations for coming here after I was confirmed, because again, as you know, there's a bit of a complicated process to become an ambassador. There's a whole confirmation process. So after I was confirmed and I could be official as designate, ambassador designate to Mauritius, I did have the opportunity to get out and talk to individuals both in the various agencies and offices in Washington. I had a very nice chance to meet with Mauritius Ambassador Jugru, and I really made a concerted effort to get a better understanding of the dynamics and issues. I think in the context of press freedoms, that is a critical issue for us. I mean, part of the reason I'm here is a recognition that the press plays a critical role in any democratic society. And one of the reasons I'm here right now is because we do consider the press to be an important part of any democratic system. We're holding government officials and others to account. So reports of press being targeted, actions against press are concerning. And, my effort to get engaged on these issues, I will be reaching out to individuals like yourself who are very much active in sort of media world, whether it's in training, educating, advocating, trying to understand what those issues are and raise those issues. I will raise those issues with government officials if there's a sense that something here is not quite right. And I will try to use the platform that the United States Embassy has here to highlight concerns about these issues, because again, without the free press, you can't sustain a democratic system. And we want to make sure that we're good partners, and we are sort of walking the walk when we talk about wanting to support democratic institutions. So it is short answer would be it is a concern. It's something I would want to engage on in my time here, and I would want to advocate for.
You've been working in the hierarchy of departments and institutions.
Sure.
Democracy is a key concept, is a key factor for the country, as you just said earlier. What can you say about the respect of institutions and the importance of institutions working together?
Well, again, when as a government official, I also recognize I'm also an American citizen. I'm an American citizen, and I want to ensure that, my rights are respected. And I want to ensure that I can live in an environment where I feel I have certain liberties and rights and can exercise those. So I have a personal vested interest, even as a government bureaucrat, to try to make sure that when I'm working, that I am accountable to the citizens. I'm not just, somebody working in isolation. And I think it's important for any government official to recognize that. And to, as you do your job, think about how are you supporting those other institutions that allow you to live a life that you feel is one that's comfortable, fulfilling, and free. So, for instance, one of the things we experience in the United States is we often will get these Freedom of Information Act requests, where journalists will often say, we want to find out about such and such, and you as a bureaucrat, government official, are obligated under law to give a certain amount of information. So we'll get these requests that come in and say, please provide this information. We take those very seriously. I take it seriously because I feel like if I do that, if I'm able to be responsive to those requests to help support greater accountability and transparency, I as a U.S. citizen will benefit. So I guess to try to answer your question, it's a good question. It's a fairly sort of complex question. I think institutions can't be seen in isolation. They have to be self-supporting. They have to help and work with each other in order to be able to make everything work. There are things you can write down in law and say, this agency, so the legislative branch has to do X, the executive branch, the judicial branch. You can write that all down, and in principle, it sounds very it makes sense, it sounds like it should work, but if it's not done in practice, it's sort of that practice. And the only way it's ever done in practice is if the individuals actually in those roles do what they're supposed to do. And I think that that's important for us to remember. We as parts of those institutions have vested interest in making sure they work, and that it's not, it's not an abstraction, that you have to, a lot of informal aspects of how these organizations work need to be sort of followed through on it, if that makes sense.
We're still striving to have the Freedom of Information Act in Mauritius till now. Every government promises it in his manifesto. What can be your appeal to the government?
Well, I think it really is important for any government to have some kind of mechanism like that. I think it's important for accountability, but I think it's also good for the government. In a way, bureaucracies are large. There's no way you can know everything that's going on. And if there's a tool that sort of provides that accountability, I think as a leader, as a manager, I want to know if there's an issue. And if I'm not aware of it and it's revealed through a Freedom of the Information Act, that gives me a chance to address that. So I do think it's something that really is important to have. There's lots of different tools like that. Ombudsman's is another tool where people have an opportunity to go to an office and say, I've got an issue here, I hope to get some support or advocacy for it. It's typically an office that's a little bit outside of government. It's government funded but separate. There are all these different tools that are out there that try to bring accountability to how governments work. And I think they're important to have. They make governments more efficient, and I think inherently for those in charge, for leaders and government officials, they're very good too, because they're a way of knowing, hey, am I doing my work well? Am I doing what I'm supposed to do? At the end of the day, it's about service to the people. They pay your salary. Everybody's salary is paid by the U.S. taxpayer. And so I have to do my job well, I really have to be responsive.
You encourage the Mauritian government?
I would encourage. I'm not aware of the circumstances of what the dynamics are with the Freedom of Information Act here, but I think if you look globally, countries that have Freedom of Information Acts or rules or laws, operate more efficiently and effectively. Again, institutions are made up of people. People are not perfect. We're all sort of have our blind spots, may not be as effective as we'd hope to be. But I think if you can create institutions or procedures or rules that sort of force that accountability, it makes us do our jobs better. I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's a good thing.
Your main project is the embassy, right, at MoCA?
Yes, we're very excited about it. I was involved in the early design process, again, in my previous role as the acting director for the Bureau of Overseas Buildings Operations. It was one of the several projects I was involved in, and for me, at that time, I didn't know I was actually going to be coming to Port Louis, so I was very excited when I found out. Again, it sort of reaffirmed to me that whenever you do a job, you try to do the best you can, because you don't know if you'll be the person on the receiving end of the final result of that work. But the key thing, I think, was from the very beginning was being very sensitive to how that project would look here to people in Mauritius. We did not want the perception that we were creating, say, a bunker up in Bagatelle, up on a hill, that was isolated from the rest of the island. But we wanted something that would feel like it was part of the community, that was integrated. So the design, as you'll see, is very open, and in fact, it's fascinating the way the architects thought through the whole geography, because one side is mostly glass and very open and exposed to the MoCA ridgeline. So you get the sense of external spaces and internal spaces. There's a lot of open area on the grounds, so that when we bring people in, there's opportunities for them to enjoy the grounds and experience that. It's also going to provide a better platform for services. So when people come for consular services, for visas and other services, they'll have a very welcoming, very open, very attractive place. Right now, because of circumstances, we have a very limited amount of space. People are sort of, tightly fit in this space as they wait for the consular services. And I don't feel it really represents the United States well. So again, there was a lot of thought how this would be integrated with the community, how it would benefit the community, just in its physical layout, but also in how it would provide a sort of a limited footprint. In other words, it would be environmentally sensitive. We looked at issues like water harvesting and thinking about the native plants that could be used so that they wouldn't consume too much water. So that wouldn't be a drain on the resources here in Mauritius, because I know water is very, very critical. It's an important resource, and it's one that I think we're experiencing some challenges with now. Similarly, using renewable electrical, and also thinking about the technologies in the building, so that, like for instance, it'll shut off all the systems or shut down or be decreased after hours, so you're not air conditioning empty spaces or having to use a lot of electricity to sustain the entire footprint. And I thought this was important because we want to feel like we're being good custodians and we're giving back to the community. The other thing I hope we're able to do is to bring in various representatives from Mauritius to see, from civil society, see how we're doing this, so that they can get a sense of how that technology might be applicable to work that's being done here in other projects, so that others could maybe incorporate that technology. Another thing we're very focused on was the artwork. We take a percentage of the budget of that project, which is a very sizable project. So you take about a 1% of that project. So it's a $300 million project. So about $3 million is essentially what we'll be spending on the artwork in there. And what we do is we try to find American artists and local artists that have some similar approaches to the work that they do. So you have sort of a dialogue between the two cultures and the art. And it's a chance also to look for up-and-coming artists and think about artists that we can help and support who are very talented and may not have had the recognition, but being present in the U.S. Embassy, it's a whole great opportunity to sort of display their art. And again, as people are coming in from the outside community, getting a chance to see some beautiful artwork and understanding the creative the creative talents here in Mauritius. So apologize if I went on quite a bit.
Okay.
I'm sure I did, but you can see I've really sort of engaged in this project, for having started from the very beginning, and then just having the fortune to come here and being able to start the process of constructing it. And we're hoping to do.
Will you be here for the inauguration?
Well, I'm hoping to. It's like I've been involved in a lot of projects that take a little bit of time, but the hope is we do the groundbreaking in coming months. It's usually a 3-year project. I'm hoping to be here at least 3 years, and so I should be here for the ribbon cutting, and that's my goal. Whether that happens or not, as you know, a project of that size can be very complicated. We will bring in some equipment and technologies, but certainly it's also an investment in the local community, because we're hoping to hire subcontractors and others. So I think it's a great project. It's got a lot of, I think it's a great project on a lot of levels, and it really gives us an opportunity, even during the construction phase, to dialogue and engage with the local community to make sure that everybody feels like this is not just an isolated embassy up on a hill, but it's part of the overall community. It's giving back to the community.
Your Excellency, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Nice to talk with you.
Jean-Luc, thank you very much for this opportunity. It's great to have a chance to talk to you. Apologies if I wax extensively on certain things, but again, for me, it's very important to have this dialogue because the freedom of press issue. The press is critical. I wanted to engage with the press early, but I also really wanted to have a chance to get out and reach out to the broadest cross sections of Mauritius that I can. So thank you for this wonderful opportunity. Really appreciate it.